Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to dive deeper into the mysterious and dynamic world of angel investing. We have a fantastic list of panelists who are about to join us on stage today. To begin with, we have ZEYNEP, partner at General Catalyst, a prominent VC fund. We also have GLORIA, founding partner at Puzzle Ventures, an angel operator fund aiming to bring together operators and founders from successful tech companies such as Personio, Stripe, and WhatsApp. And then finally, we have Carmen, founder of Cocoa, a self-described VC turned angel. And moderating the session is ELEANOR, deputy editor of our favorite publication, SIFTED. So enjoy, everyone.
Awesome.
Oh. We're going to have one more guest in a second. I think this is the only all-female panel today, which is amazing. Yes, let's hear a round of applause for the all-female panel. We're just going to wait for Carmen in a second. No worries, everyone. We'll just wait for a second. I feel like it's a good crowd. Earlier in the afternoon, I feel like it kind of thinned out a little bit, but I feel like we've got the evening session now.
Yeah, the rain helps.
The rain helps. And here she is, our final panelist, Carmen. Okay, we don't have much time, so we're going to kick things off. Today, we're talking about Europe's early stage ecosystem and angel investing. So, Gloria, I'm going to go to you for the first question. Kind of start at the most early stages. We've seen this incredible rise of the angel community in Europe. What is behind this?
I think it's basically two aspects. One, we were far behind on operators being VCs. So I remember when I was a VC in 2016, 17, I read a study that said 92% of European VCs had never been an operator or founder before. So a lot of people came from consulting or investment banking. And I think a lot of the founders that started businesses back then didn't really feel represented. They didn't really feel like the other side of the table really had empathy for that journey. And I think a lot of them had in mind, oh yeah, if I have money one day, I want to change that and I want to contribute to the ecosystem. And then in the last couple of years, we just had a rise of exits in Europe. We never had exits historically. But I looked up the numbers, and in 2021, there was 3 trillion in enterprise value if you accumulate all the companies in Europe. We had in 20 and 21 about 350 billion euros in exits. And all of these founders and operators, they finally had money to deploy and to give back to the ecosystem. You can only buy so many properties, and you really understand the technology ecosystem. And so a lot of people ended up just really wanting to change something, wanted to bring the operating perspective into the European ecosystem. And then we had obviously also the rise of scout funds, where there are probably 15 to 20 scout funds now in Europe, which enabled smaller operators that probably didn't have huge exits yet to become active angels.
Yeah, completely. I think scout funds have definitely played a bigger role, and you see larger VC funds trying to encourage that angel community, that formation there. ZEYNEP, what do you think about the whole scout phenomenon?
I agree with Gloria. Recycling of talent and capital is incredibly important for this ecosystem to be built. And with the scout programs, it's particularly important in Europe because it's a fragmented ecosystem. So scout programs have been superpowering early stage investing, particularly angel and seed, which is where the magic happens. And more than that, it's really superpowered collaboration. And as we know, it takes a village to build a company. So the more collaborative that all the funds work and the angels and the scout programs work, it actually helps the companies.
Definitely. So Carmen, I want to come to you now to kind of bridge that gap between angel investing and early stage funds. How do you see that collaboration taking step from the pre-seed to the first institutional check?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think one that the wave of emerging managers and microfunds, like Gloria's or Cocoa's, really is fostering. Because if you think about it, the beauty of being an angel or a microfund is that we're very flexible with our ticket size and we're very flexible with our stake, which means that we can really work together with funds and collaborate rather than compete, and therefore kind of build win-win situations. So at the end of the day, because if ZEYNEP wants to invest into a company, whether I invest or not doesn't take anything from her, and whether she invests or not doesn't take anything from me, it can be both of us, not just her or me, that changes the dynamics completely. And so we share deals constantly, which has also made Europe a very fluid ecosystem in what people see. We share DD insights a lot. And we also, when it comes down to actually working with the founders, it's also a very symbiotic relationship, because when you're small, like a microfund, and you have like an angel stake, the relationship you can build with the founder is different than when you have a big stake. It's not better or worse, but they're different relationships. And so if we both, the lead fund and like the small microfund, work together, we can really play the different roles to make sure nothing gets lost in translation, and actually kind of people can coordinate and work together. So I think it's a very, it's really moving the ecosystem forward, and it's a lot of fun.
Completely. I think you touched on a really interesting thing there, which was your ability to go in and not really care about how big a stake was, and use that to form a collaborative relationship around a deal, right? And that's such a big question that so many VCs have. Is it about access, or is it about, you know, getting ownership? I'd love to hear your take on that, ZEYNEP, because obviously you guys are a little bit further on in the value chain, right? How do you think about that, and how do you explain that to founders?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance between access and ownership. So it's about investing in the right companies. And for us, as General Catalyst, we've been investing in Europe very actively since 2016. We were, at the beginning, more investing at the growth stage because we were based in the US. We opened our office 2 years ago. Then we became more active in Europe doing early stage investing. What we know is the European venture ecosystem is built on local funds, and they are incredibly important to this ecosystem. And I think if you want to be collaborative and you want to be investing with other funds, then you need to sometimes give up on ownership. And that's OK, because that's something you can build over time. It's a lot more important that your partners are also getting ownership. And it's a lot more important that you're in the right companies and you have the right people around it to provide value add.
I think there are like two dimensions to ZEYNEP's point. I think there's one which is smart. There's one which is your fund model. And math is math, right? And you have two levers to maximize the probability of a company being a fund returner. The size of your fund, which you cannot change once you've raised it, and the stake you own. Because if you're a 100 million fund, you own 1% at exit, a company needs to be a $10 billion company. If you own 10% at exit, a company needs to be a $1 billion company to be a fund returner. And that's math. Now, and that's why the smaller the fund, the more flexible you can be on stake. Now, on the other, on ZEYNEP's point, which is also very true, is understanding that this is a very long-term game, right? And that if you optimize for everybody feeling like that's a win-win situation, you can then build up stake in the future in that specific deal, and you'll get many more deals from those people. So I think that is the two kind of forces at play. We tell founders we don't give a damn about stake, but I can do that because of the fund model. And I really actually believe that funds who are much larger and are constrained math-wise, but understand the long-term like nature of the game, are quite smart.
So how do solo GPs fit into all of this, Gloria?
I think a solo GP is just a more flexible microfund model, meaning for me, what counts a lot is speed. I can basically go from meeting the founder from the first time to like making an investment decision in 2, 3, 4 days.
What's the quickest decision you've made?
36 hours.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Basically. Because I knew they had a lead term sheet that they hadn't accepted yet, they hadn't started speaking to angels, and in order to get the allocation that I wanted, I had to make a decision before they're basically going out to the market. And so for me, that kind of being able to just drop everything else, not needing to go through several different levels of approvals. I mean, I was at Index for a couple of years, And I can tell you, like, it's definitely different levels of approval to get there. Sometimes with the US, so you have the problem with the time zones, etc. And I can just be like, okay, I believe in this or not. I do some references. I call a couple of LPs, operator LPs, and be like, hey, is this something you would use in your company? Yes, no. And I can be really, really quick. And that's kind of even easier if you're on your own and you don't have to even coordinate with a second GP. The most important point, though, for me was that the smaller the fund size, the more collaborative I can be, because then the fund model maths work really, really well. And so the more GPs you have, the larger the fund needs to be, because otherwise, also financially, at some point, it doesn't make that much sense anymore. And so for me, the way I was telling the story to LPs was, look, as an EQT on the block in Europe, I think you have to decide between ownership and access. Only the really brand name VCs can really do both. The Sequoias, they don't have to care about whether they get in, and if they ask for 15%, they'll get 15%. However, I have to decide between the two. So I clearly am going after access for several different reasons. A, it's more fun to work with the best founders across Europe. B, I think Europe is not a large enough ecosystem that there are tons and tons of unicorn founders like starting out today, like every single year. So going into the best companies is even more important than in the US.
Right.
And so it was really important for me to kind of go after access. And at the same time, what I saw when I was an angel after my VC period, I saw the seed funds were raising larger and larger funds. And so all of a sudden, they had to play for ownership as well.
Right.
The multi-stage funds were coming earlier and earlier. Index launched a seed fund, for example, and they're going to continue being like that. So all of a sudden, they can't be collaborative with each other anymore. But there's room for someone like me. And I always say, like, greed is a very, very big emotion, and meaning they're not going to decrease their fund size going forward. So they basically will need to play the ownership game going forward. And so there is a gap in the market that I can basically play in.
Yeah, totally. And I think that hints to something that we've discussed before, which is some of these funds are going to get squeezed, right, in competition for these fewer good deals, right? I know, ZEYNEP, that's something that we were talking about for sure.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to my point of when you're working and collaborating and you're investing with your partners, you want to make sure, as much as possible, everyone's happy.
Yeah.
And local funds are kind of the backbone of the venture ecosystem we have in Europe. So if a unicorn is coming out of Germany and there's no German fund that's invested in it, that's not really good for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's really important that the local partners that we have, the local successful funds, get to be a part of that journey. So I think with what Carmen was saying, if you have that long-term vision, you need to make sure that the funds and people you collaborate with get to be in those companies.
Totally. The other thing that we haven't talked about today is liquidity. And that's super important at the early stage, so that those angels or founders turned angels or operators turned angels can also see some liquidity and put that back in the ecosystem. How have you thought about that as both an angel and early stage fund, Carmen?
So I've thought a lot about that also because I put together 100% of Hopin's pre-seed, and everybody asks me if I sold on time. And no, I did not. Look, I think that's actually an interesting thing for us to think as an ecosystem as well. As Gloria was saying, Europe doesn't have that many exits, right? And it doesn't have that many IPOs, but also acquisitions are getting harder and harder because of the competition. It is actually quite difficult to see the liquidity events. And so as a small shareholder, there is this question of like when to get out. And also, I think that we've constantly been debated between this idea of being builders and supporting the company till the end, and another of our fiduciary duties, which is to generate returns for the LPs. And I think that that's there's no answer, but it is, as an ecosystem in Europe, we should really think about it, because I think that it is one of the things where probably the US is a little bit ahead than we are in that more like transactional money-making mindset.
Yeah.
Even in like provoking exits when like a company is not going to be an IPO, but it could be a 200 or 300 million acquisition. And I think in Europe, we will get there, but it's still a little bit early in how to generate those liquidity events, not just wait for them to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Gloria, how do you think about that liquidity question? What are some of the barriers you see there in Europe?
The good news is that it's easier to exit 2, 3, 4%, like a small fund, than 20%, especially if you just let the last round or the 2 rounds before, etc. So I really hope that at some point there's a need to clean out the cap table, and as part of that, people like us can actually also exit some of the positions. At the same time, in my angel investments, I've been terribly bad at it because I always believe, like, okay, they can go further. So Pigment is one of my angel investments, actually. And I had the chance to sell all of my shares in the last round, and I said no. And I hopefully won't regret it. But I think definitely I'm only investing in B2B companies. Most of them need to think global from day one. So hopefully they have a chance to also go public in the US, for which you need US revenue. Otherwise, it's really tough to do that. And so hopefully it's going to be a little bit easier to see some liquidity earlier than for some other types of investors, or for investors that are only spending or investing in consumer companies, for sure, for example, that have a harder time to exit, I would say.
Yeah. ZEYNEP, what's your view on the liquidity question?
Gloria kind of hit the problem. When we think about an IPO, we think about the US.
Yeah.
And I think that is the problem. As a multi-stage investor, of course, this is more of an urgent problem for me, because we don't really get to do those secondaries. When we invest in a company, we're there for the long journey. Even if you join at seed, for example, Stripe, we're still with them, and we're building our position, and we still have a big share. And that's going to be really important in Europe. I think it's the one topic probably that keeps me up at night. You know, what is going to be the IPO market going forward? Particularly in my domain, which is more fintech, a lot of very successful outcomes are local companies.
Yeah.
They're in France, they're in Germany. And the question is, where do they go public? So I think that's something that the venture industry we can all collaborate on and think about, because it's going to be a problem that we're going to be facing in the next 3 to 5 years.
Totally. Praying for exits, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to kind of end off. We have a couple minutes left with a rapid fire round. So I'd love to hear from each of you first, maybe, well, we can combine it. What you think some of the biggest risks or challenges are in the ecosystem, and what do you think European tech, European startup ecosystem needs to take it to the next level? Let's start with you, Carmen.
I think I'll pick up on what we were talking about, which is the exit, like returns. At the end of the day, like what matters to LP is return generation. And I think that there is a question, and I'll start by saying, if I could choose where to start Cocoa again, I would do it in Europe 100%. So my conviction is full, but it is true that there's a question of where does Europe stand when kind of the tide recedes, and then like there's Asia, like there's, and then there's the US, and money allocation from the largest LPs in the world, like where is Europe left at, and we'll see.
Yeah, agreed. Gloria?
I think another aspect that doesn't get talked about a lot is where is our money coming from? And unfortunately, it is coming from, especially from the large funds, it's coming predominantly from American LPs.
Yeah.
So the people that are going to make money here are in the US. It's the Canadian, American pension funds, endowment, university endowments, etc. And it's still super, super hard to raise capital in Europe. You have the public funds, the EIFs, the BPIs, the KFWs, etc. that probably represent 50% of all early stage funds. Capital base is probably from these public sources. It's still tremendously difficult to raise from European LPs. I probably spent 5% of my time raising from US LPs, and I managed to get 50% of my capital from the US LPs. Like, the decision making is so much quicker. In Europe, it's like a 6 months process, a 9 months process. EIF is like 12, 15 months process. In the US, it's like 2 meetings. They don't know you, but they're still going to commit. And it's really like it's also hurting myself. I would prefer to like work for European pensioners and not for American pensioners. But there's just not that much sophisticated LP capital. I would say the LP landscape today is where the European GP landscape was 10 years or 15 years ago. The level of sophistication and also the level of parties that are out there that can actually, that are professional and can actually write decently sized checks.
Yeah, 100%. Getting those institutional investors to believe in European venture, right? ZEYNEP.
I agree with Carmen. I think we do need to think about the IPO market, so that's definitely one, particularly for pan-European companies, because the IPO market is fragmented in Europe. And the other thing I'll say is collaboration, because in Europe, you do need a village to build a company anywhere. In Europe, you need a very diverse village. So I think it's important for us to remember that.
Yeah, and it starts with panels like this,
with
3 amazing fund managers. Thank you so much today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.